Hey everyone, Mo here, and before the video begins, I just want to let you guys know that my schedule has opened up for me to do coaching again. So if you're interested in private one-on-one coaching for me to help you, whether you're a newer player and you want to excel at the game very quickly and learn the fundamentals without developing any bad habits early, or if you're an experienced player who's already maybe platinum or diamond in your top 1%, but you need some help filling in the gap to get you to that 0.01%, to make you just some of the best, then hit me up on Discord and I can get you in some private one-on-one coaching lessons to help you polish up any skills you want to refine and help you learn all of the secrets to becoming a top player. That's it. I hope you enjoy the video. Hey everybody, Mo here, and in this video I'm going to start my meta report, my weekly meta reports using Cosmic Plays information from Mobalytics and using his infographics. So he said I could use them, and I'm going to use them to bring you guys information weekly on what either changes in the meta or what the meta looks like right now. Maybe there's a new deck or two that's on the rise, there's a deck or two that kind of fell off, just so that way I can help you guys stay intact of a bunch of decks that maybe you don't see, because I know a lot of people get tunneled in, and for instance like Lulu Zed, as we'll get to in a minute, has been kind of on the rise for the last week, maybe 2 weeks, but a lot of people don't think this deck is actually that good because either they don't play it or maybe it's just they don't see it that often, but it's really starting to pick up steam. And if you look here, it's the third most played deck, and it has this insane win rate of 57%. I think last week I had a 58% win rate, which is like the highest across any Diamond Plus deck, I think, in the last like half year, if not more than that, since Go Hard or so. So just like that. So the goal for these videos is just going to be to keep everyone up to date, so that way you know what to look out for. Maybe if you want to try, if you're one of the anti-meta players, you can try and build an anti-meta deck to beat some of these top ones. But let's, before we get into the stats, I'm going to go ahead and remind you guys that we're really close to hitting our 3,000 subscriber goal. So if you guys could like the video and subscribe to help us get to that 3,000 subscriber goal, that'd be insane, and it always helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. So that's it for the intro. Let's get into this meta review for August 9th. And yeah, so we'll just start at the top. These are the 9 most played decks in Diamond Plus, and meta decks, that is. So if you see here, the overall meta is there's 31% non-meta decks, 27% other meta decks that aren't these 9, and then these meta decks make up whatever the rest of it is, between 31 and 27. So it's too early to do math, and it's 2 p.m., but we're not going to talk about that. Basically, this pie is really good. I mean, having 31% non-meta decks is something that you would like never see in Magic the Gathering, for instance, and like most other card games. I feel like this statistic right here is kind of crazy and really, really cool. Unfortunately, the decks that are the best are usually just these meta decks that are most played. So we're gonna go over the 9 most played meta decks right now, look at their win rate, talk about maybe why they're winning, and things you can do to try and counter these decks. So we'll start with Plunder as a most played deck right now by about 3,000 matches is what it looks like. 54% win rate, so pretty good, almost at that 55% mark where people start looking at it and calling for nerfs. Basically, the reason people are playing Plunder is because it beats, or is supposed to beat, these Sivir Actions, the Sivir Zeds, these like Shurima Ionia mid-range decks. Plunder's pretty decent against all the mid-range decks because you kind of just stall early in mid-game. You eventually slam a Sejuani, and then if you are able to level up your Sejuani and have at least one way to trigger Plunder, you kind of just blow the game out from there. The main issue with this deck is whenever you play against these decks like Sivir Action and the other mid-range decks, if they kind of just kill you before you get your Sejuani online, either leveled or even in play sometimes, I mean, you just kind of lose the game, right? Your only elusive, I think, is Zap Sprayfin. So if you don't have like exactly a Zap Sprayfin on turn 4, if you even play Zap Sprayfin, then you kind of just die. I think I have, last time I checked, I had around a 73% win rate with Sivir Action into Plunder, which is really crazy because Plunder is supposed to always beat Sivir Action. Like, that's the main reason why the deck started being played. And the fact that I have over a 70% win rate into it just shows you that it's either not a consistent counter or Sivir Action is just way too damn good. But yeah, so that's what the deck is built for and good into. What it's bad into is all of the aggressive decks. You just go super wide with things like Pirate Aggro, Discard Aggro, Azir Irelia, Lulu Zed, Lurk even. Anything that doesn't play a 1 HP aggressive unit, you kind of just stomp this deck. This deck is really good at dealing with 1 HP units early on because you play either Ice Shard or Make It Rain, and that's really good at dealing with Aggro Swarm with 1 HP. But if you notice in like Discard Aggro, you play a bunch of 2 health units. You play like House Spider, Arena Battlecaster, Draven. They can't really deal with those. And Azir Irelia, the only 1 HP units you have is like Duo and then Student if you haven't played another unit that turn. And then with like Lulu Zed, you don't have many 1 HP units. Lurk, you only have 1 HP unit. So all of these aggro swarm style decks that play 2 HP units kind of just destroy Plunder. So that's how you would counter this deck. As well as, I believe, just hard control also counters the deck, but I'm not 100% on that. Azir Irelia, everyone's favorite deck with good play patterns, and the deck that Riot just consistently buffs every single patch for some reason. Coming in the second most played deck here by about 1,000 matches, not even like 500 matches, so very close to being under Lulu's head. Only a 54% win rate, which is actually better than the 52% win rate that everyone memes on, and it's almost at the 55% win rate where people start calling for nerfs, and Riot says they're going to look into it. Basically, it's just Azir Irelia. Literally nothing has changed with this deck in the last, I think at this point it's been almost 4 months. Deck is still miserable to play against. It's unfun. It doesn't really punish you if you make mistakes, because you kind of just like blade dance and do a bunch of dumb shit, and you don't really have to think. You kind of just slam blade dance cards and win in lower elo and higher elo. It's just hard to play around not knowing how many times you're going to get attacked. So Azir Irelia is just a super solid option, as well as it bullies out every control deck. It bullies out Plunder, which is good. You can beat Sivir Action. If Sivir Action doesn't kill you on turns 5 and 6, and you have that really good curve of like Azir on 3, Irelia on 4, and you have attack options on 5, you just like win the game basically. Doesn't matter how many blockers your opponents have, doesn't matter if they have Spirit's Refuge, doesn't matter any of that. You kind of just blade dance 3 or 4 times, level up both champions, and win the game on turn 5. The way you beat Azir Irelia is the same way you beat Plunder, though, which is just aggro. You just beat them down. Lurk, fearsome aggro. Pirate Burn, swarm aggro. Discard aggro, swarm aggro. Lulu Zed, elusive swarm aggro. So, if you notice, like, half of these decks on this list are good either into each other or specifically into Sivir Action, because that's what this entire week's meta was about, was countering the Sivir Action deck. This deck that has been dominating ladder for the last, like, 2 or 3 weeks now. The whole idea was to find decks that could counter this, and we've done that. We found Plunder, which is pretty decent into it. People think that like Draven Ezreal and TF Swain is good into that. Lulu Zed is pretty good into that. Lulu Jinx is pretty good into that. The problem is all of those decks that beat Sivir Action also just get completely bodied by these swarm aggro style decks. So that's why once we start going down the list, out of these 9 decks, 4 of them are just straight up aggro swarm decks, because the 4 aggro swarm decks beat the 5 non-aggro swarm decks. So it's a really cool like triangle we have going on here. Third most played deck by not much, 500, is Lulu Zed. 57% win rate. That's ridiculous. That is an insane win rate. Like I said, I think last week it had the highest win rate we've ever seen since Go Hard for a Diamond Plus deck with this many games on it. The deck itself is just nuts. I believe it only loses to like Draven Ezreal, TF Swain, and Karma Ezreal. Basically these super hard board wipe decks. I believe it also folds to SI Freljord decks like the Field Rush, the Watcher combos, the TLCs, stuff like that, where you're just playing hard Shadow Isle Freljord control, because Avalanche. This deck is really, really bad into mass removal, which is why Draven Ezreal and TF Swain do really well into it, because they play like 30 removal spells and then 10 actual units to win the game. Same with SI Freljord, is they usually play like 6 avalanches or 6 avalanches and then like ice shards and 6 Vile Feast, stuff like that, to just like single-handedly remove all of your units. And because none of your units are too large, they all just die to these small removal spells. But if you notice here, there is not a single Shadow Isle deck on this top 9 played, and there is only one deck that includes Freljord, and I wouldn't even call this a Freljord deck, because most of the time the only Freljord cards in Plunder is literally your 3 Sejuani. Maybe some people are playing like a 1 of Bjerg, but for the most part, because you want to make sure you hit your allegiance trigger, the only Frostbite, or the only Freljord card in Plunder is just Sejuani. So realistically, there's 0 Shadow Isles, 0 Freljord. This deck, 0 Targon, if you notice here. This meta feels very just dominated by Shurima, Ionia, and then like Nox PNZ. Like, Noxus, Shurima, Ionia are the 3 regions that are just completely dominating this meta and dictating what decks can be played and what decks can't be played. So next we'll go down to the 4th most played deck, which is Lurkers. And then you start to see huge gaps between the top played decks and then the like middle played decks. So you see Lulu Zed has 6,000 more games on it than Lurkers. Basically, Lurkers right now is just kind of a high rolly deck where if you draw well, you beat just about everything. It's another one of those Swarm aggro decks where you just destroy Plunder, destroy Azir Irelia, destroy Sivir Action if you draw well, destroy like these mid-range Shin mid-range decks if you draw well, because you just open up with like 1 mana 5 power unit and they can't really deal with that too well. On top of all of that, Pike spell is just kind of broken. Like, everyone complained that Tri-Beam was too broken. They're like, oh, Tri-Beam is too nuts. It's a huge, like, tempo swing. You kill a unit, and then you summon a unit for that cost for only 4 mana or 5 mana. Well, what if it was also 4 mana, but then also fast speed, and then also every once in a while completely board wiped your opponent, right? Oh, yeah, and summoned you a big-ass unit. Yeah, that's pretty broken. So, because of Pike spells, single-handedly, Lurkers is just nuts. It's carrying that. And because Lurkers counters a lot of these other mid-range decks, that's why it's up here. Shin mid-range, I believe it's fallen a little bit from last week. But basically, people thought that you could counter Sivir Action with Shin mid-range, and that's why it's being played so much, because barriers destroy Sivir Action. People think that, oh, well, the answer to mid-range matchups is I give yourself vulnerable and I win with quick attack. Well, barriers beat quick attack, because it doesn't matter if you have quick attack. If my unit has barrier on it, then my unit will kill your Sivir every single time. So you're forcing your opponent to consistently have spells to keep their units alive through things like a barriered up dragon, a barriered up challenger unit. Like Shin is super dominating, Jarvan is super dominating in that matchup. So that's why Shin is being played so much. Sivir Action is still here. It's definitely gone down a lot in play rate. I think it's just because people started to find these counters. So it pushed out the not best Sivir Action pilots. Because you don't get as many free wins whenever you're playing against one of these like counter decks. I'm gonna use quotations because I don't think anything consistently actually counters Sivir Action. Because except for like, I think Lulu Z is the only hard counter to Sivir Action because you play so many elusive units and you're aggressive. That's like the two things that Sivir Action hates. Anything that's not being aggressive with elusive units, Sivir Action also just has this random tendency to be like, oops, it's turn 5, you die, right? And that's pretty annoying, and that's usually how you win the like Plunder matchups. You just hard mulligan for these greedy combo turns, your opponent can't do anything about it, and you just like, oops, I won the game, right? And that's why Sivir Action is so powerful. That's why Shurima Ionia is just such a power region between Azir Irelia and Sivir Action. If you're not banning Shurima Ionia in your seasonals, you're probably trolling. And that's coming from someone who's not going to ban Shurima Ionia during seasonals because I'm bringing triple aggro, but do as I advise, not as I do. You know, some people are built different, and some people watch meta reviews. But I'm just kidding. So, yeah, I mean, Sivir Action's still dominating. I'm pretty sure it just went down in play rate because everyone's just trying to counter it. Pirate aggro, discard aggro, I'm going to clump these together because they're basically the same. Like, you play them for the same reasons. They're both just your standard nutty aggro deck that beat really bad players super easily. You beat any deck that stumbles really easily. You beat the high play decks of, like, Plunder, Azir Irelia, Shin midrange. You're struggling against the like hard removal like Draven Ezreal that are starting to pop up, but if you're beating, you know, 4 or like 7 out of the top 10 decks and you're randomly losing to Draven Ezreal, that's really, really good. So Discard Aggro, Pirate Burn are both on here. 55% win rate for Pirate Burn, 4,000 less matches, and 53% win rate for Discard Aggro. They realistically fill the exact same role in beating these like greedier decks while also just randomly beating up every deck that stumbles ever, and that's what aggro is good at. And then your 9th most played deck here is Draven Ezreal. Draven Ezreal has started popping up in popularity because people are playing a bunch of just random garbage, and Draven Ezreal is the king of random garbage beaters because it's just an extremely consistent deck that a good player piloting Draven Ezreal can beat most bad players piloting just about anything else. It is the most fair deck in the game where you're just like, oh, I'm gonna go even in every matchup. There's very few matchups where Draven Ezreal is actually like just like hard unfavored or hard favored into. Most of its matchup fields are just 50-50. Because of that, it's not the greatest deck because you'll never have an advantage and you just have to work twice as hard for all your wins, and that's not really good. But because it doesn't have any like hard bad matchups, if you're a really good player and a really good pilot, then people can take this style of deck to the ceiling. Like, I believe rank 1 was just taken by 3 different people in the last 3 days, and every single one of them was using either Draven Ezreal or TF Swain. Both are basically the exact same deck, just with, you know, different cards filling the exact same roles. So that's just proving that, again, if you're a really good player and a really good pilot, you can take these styles of decks and do well with it. But you have to work twice as hard for the same win that you could get playing Sivir Action or playing like Plunder or Lulu or something like that. So that's it for all the most played decks in the meta review. Basically, what this week's meta looks like is probably just gonna turn. If I had to guess, what I would recommend is finding ways to counter the most played decks that are countering Sivir Action. So we're gonna go in a giant wheel here. It was basically Sivir Action was dominating. Now we have all the ways to counter Sivir Action, and now it's going to go all the ways to counter the counters to Sivir Action, which is going to be all of these aggro decks. Like Lurk has been played. I believe there's like 3 or 4 Lurk decks in the top 16. It's almost like a quarter of the top 16 on ladder is playing Lurk. So if you really want to 9-head ladder right now, I would personally just be playing either Thralls or Shadow Isle Freljord, because you get to catch the end of that circle of Shadow Isle Freljord beats Draven Ezreal. Like, Shadow Isle Freljord right now, if you're looking at this, beats 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It beats 7 out of the 9 of these just extremely easily. You don't beat, basically, the Shrima Ionia decks, but that's 10% of the ladder. If you're okay with beating the other, like, 80% that is just dominating, like Shadow Isle Freljord is really, really nuts. I don't understand why it's being so underplayed right now. If you just look at all the statistics of the top decks being played and the meta decks being played, it actually looks really, really good. So that's what I would recommend playing for this week. That's where I predict the Shadow Isle Freljord stonks are going up. Seasonals is this weekend, so I expect there to be a lot of Shadow Isle Freljord in Seasonals, or at least that's what I would recommend, because from what I've seen players say, they're either playing full mid-range decks or full aggro decks. So the way you beat those is by playing, you know, full control decks most of the time. So that's going to be it for this meta review. If you guys like this series and want to keep it going, make sure to let me know in the comments below. If there's anything you want me to touch on or go over in the next meta review for next Monday, make sure to let me know in the comments, because this is my first time doing a meta review style video. So all the feedback and all the support is greatly, greatly appreciated. And I do read the comments and I'll read them all. So I appreciate it. Make sure to join my Discord below in the description below. Make sure to go follow me on Twitch, where I'll be doing a bunch of gameplay over there of labs and ranked and preparing for seasonals this weekend. I went 9-0 last seasonals and during the Swiss, so I'm going to try and repeat that, obviously, while I try and figure out what exactly my lineup is going to be. So if you guys are interested in that stuff, go check out my Twitch, and I'll see you guys in the next video.